And welcome to another video. This is going to be my first impressions for the mid-2000s action comedy shonen Nobari no by Yuki Kamitani. Now, if you're not familiar with this series, it follows this middle school boy who really just is very apathetic to his life. He just sort of cruises through, doesn't care too much about, the people around him, but then discovers he's being targeted by a evil group of ninjas because he contains a super secret special ninja skill. So that's sort of the basic premise, and then so he has to sort of stop being apathetic to what's going on around him, meet the other ninja who are in his life and sort of prevent the bad ninjas from getting this super powerful technique that will make them the kings of the ninja world. Now, if you couldn't tell from my voice, it's a very silly but pretty typical shonen premise. I'm not always a big fan of those. When I originally heard about this series, which was years and years ago, I sort of dismissed it. I didn't necessarily think it was something I'd ever want to read. I'm just not one for, middle school ninja hijinks. But when I discovered later on who actually wrote it, Yuki Kamitani, now in recent months I've actually gotten quite interested in this series. Kamitani's other current work, Shimanami Tasugare, is probably one of the most interesting series coming out in Japan right now. Not yet licensed in English, but hopefully someday. But because of my interest in their other work, I really wanted to give this series a revisit and give it a proper chance rather than just dismissing it off the bat from the premise. And I have to say I was quite intrigued and impressed, and it has caught my attention. At this point in the series, it is a 14-volume long series, so not super long, but this volume is pretty typical. It gives you the normal setup. It introduces sort of our main cast of characters, and like with a lot of these action shonens, it is sort of, whilst it does have action sequences in it, it is majorly like a comedy, or lighthearted, as well as sort of the action set pieces. Reading this particular volume, I was struck at how very mid-2000s the art was. It's got this noodly quality, big hands, big feet that you don't really see that much in manga. I think these days I was like, this seems very early 2000s, and then I checked when this originally was published in Japan, and it was 2004, so I was pretty spot on. In saying that, all of the characters are pretty interesting. I find the main character pretty likable. He's sort of a typical apathetic character that you might see, not necessarily as the main character, but if you have seen the recent Tanaka's Always Listless, he falls into sort of that character trope, but he does have the mischievous side to him as well. I feel like he's not like a typical shonen protagonist in that he's sort of like the lovable idiot and just overzealous and very exuberant and overly emotional. He's a little bit of the antithesis of that, whereas the other characters around him are a little more expressive. They get frustrated, and there's a lot of comedy to be had with that, and his total lack of interest for learning about his ninja past and sort of wanting to better his ninja skills. He doesn't really care too much about that until problems actually start to affect the people he cares about and sort of his own life. So it's interesting to see that sort of character as the main character, which gives this series a little bit of an edge. The other two mainish middle school characters are fairly typical. You've got the somewhat standoffish tsundere, but yeah, I'd say tsundere, girl who's come to see and sort of claim this power for her own under the guise of helping helping his side, and then you have sort of his classmate who's just a typical nice guy who's been working at this forever and sort of overlooking him for a while, as well as their teacher who it's hinted at has sort of a very personal relationship and backstory with the main character, so I'm expecting that to be expanded on later on in the series. But yes, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. I had heard unusually high praise for this series in previous years, but like I said, it's not typically a genre I necessarily enjoy, and from what I knew about it from various, like the anime trailer and that, it didn't seem my sort of thing, but I'm glad I gave it a second chance. I think Kamatani has a really interesting way of writing things that are pretty typical tropes, so you don't feel like you're watching something you've seen 15,000 or reading something you've read 15,000 times before. It is, in saying that, it is still a pretty generic action shonen as of volume 1, but it does have 14 volumes to improve, and sort of the main villain, or the main evil group, is fairly interesting as well. There's another character that was introduced as sort of the dark horse, I guess, major threat in this volume, and from what I know of the promo art and everything to do with this series, is sort of a foil to our main character. He is quite important to the overall story, so I look forward to finding out more about that. But yeah, this is a little bit of an older series. I don't quite remember or know when Yen first printed this, but it is complete in English, from Yen Press, as I mentioned. It's one that might surprise you if you give it the chance. I didn't necessarily expect to enjoy it as much as I did. If you had told me, 5 years ago that I'd be reading this series, I would have been utterly shocked and surprised, but I'm glad that I did give it the second chance. It's not something record-breaking or not something that's going to change your entire life, but I think it's fun, and I'm interested to see where it's going from here. So yes, that's my first impressions on Nabari no O. I'm looking forward to reading more. It really does seem like one that can surprise you a lot. Something along the lines of like a Pandora Hearts, even though the settings are completely different. I feel that they start the same way, with this sort of very humor focused with action laced into it, building to a much more emotionally vibrant and deep series as it goes on. So I look forward to that if and when it happens. But yeah, those have been my thoughts. Maybe you can tell me your experiences with this series, whether you've read it or whether you skipped over it because you didn't know much about it. Whether you really like it or you really hate it. Give me reasons why. I love reading your comments, guys. But thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye till then.